Hello, this is Joe Uline here to talk to you about strength strategies to reinforce and maintain hip mobility. What that means is, okay, we've done the work from last month's column about using these side door strategies, doing soft tissue massage to the outside and the inside hip to restore these big functional motions of the hip during the run stride. How do we keep them? How do we make sure that we don't have to keep massaging the leg over and over again? And it has to do with strengthening. The brain has to know how to control, how to move through this full range, but also at an intricate level, how to control the ball in the socket. So in the previous videos, we talked about some strategies on the ground with some foundational hip stability exercises. This is going to be more functional, and it's going to talk about the concept of hip loading. And what hip loading is truly is a hip hinge, which we talked about before as this foundational athletic position where we want to run. Hip hinging is putting the pelvis behind so that the hip can do work, and in a running sense, so that the hip can push behind us and propel us forward. How we work on that from a strength standpoint, how we efficiently hip load, has a lot to do with the pelvis, the position of the pelvis in relation to the femur. And so there's two things that we want to do for efficient hip loading. The first is to have pelvis level. And so you can see my waistband. To be pelvis level means I am putting the hat of the acetabulum of the hip joint on top of the femur itself. A lot of people, when they disuse their hips or when the hip is weak, they will cheat. I call this hip escape, or pelvic escape. So the pelvis is riding up, it's going away from that ball, and so instead of using the glutes to push off, it's using the quad instead. And so lesson number one for hip loading is to have the pelvis level or pelvis down posteriorly on the work. The second component is a little bit tricky though, and it is the pelvis posterior. Sometimes people will do a really good job at keeping the pelvis level when they do something like a step up, but what they do is, rather than have the pelvis underneath them, they will cheat by letting the pelvis go forward. This is also a pelvic escape that's going to be more likely to use your quad, and it causes a knee buckling in, which we talked about extensively. If my pelvis goes forward, my knee goes in. If I take my pelvis and I put it posteriorly, see what it does to my knee. It lines it up. So that plane is best demonstrated using something like this broom handle. So if I am level, if I'm not level, if I'm pelvic escaping, you can see that the angle of my pelvis is off. It's elevated. I want to drop that down. But now what this is going to show you, let's look in this plane. When I am pelvis loaded, that pull is coming right back at you guys. If I pelvic escape, now my pelvis is actually pointed to the left, but you can see that my pelvis on the right is forward. It's not loaded and ready to do the work behind me. If I take my pelvis and I put it posterior, now I'm ready to go. So pelvic loading, hip loading, pelvic position is down and back. And so the resultant force vector is this posterior lateral loading. And you should feel like almost a stretch here. And that's why it's so important we did all that ball work. So we did the massage here, we did the massage here to get that hip to be able to engage right there. The ball sits in the joint, the muscles are ready to go so that when we step up, we are powerful and stable. And then the hardest part is on this descent. Can I also keep the pelvis down and back as I lower? So there's nothing quite like this classic step-up exercise to work on that with true pelvic loading. Let me show you the side view. Level behind, I'm going to drive up, and then I'm going to hinge, again, without my pelvis dropping. I keep it level, I put it behind me, and down I go. When you load your hip really well, you're going to find that you're going to be more stable with less knee wobble. One more time. Classic step up for hip loading, pelvis level, pelvis behind, drive up, slowly lower, and back down. Work on this as an exercise, and then when you're out on a run or on a trail, power hike, thinking about pelvis down and back, and perform your uphill running and even downhill running with your hips in this down and back position. Good luck.